Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Webinar Wednesday and happy Back to School Month. My name is Ria Stark, and today we're going to be talking about genrefication in school libraries. And this is a common theme that we are seeing in schools, especially as library staff think about the ways that they can make their collection more accessible to their students and to their readers, and in a way that makes sense for how students engage with that material. So before I introduce our panelists, let me go through my usual housekeeping items. First, we are live this Wednesday afternoon, and as a live participant, you have the ability to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation. So if you think of something, please add that into the questions panel, and we'll go ahead and get to those at the end of the session. If you liked what you saw today and want to share it with a colleague or want to rewatch it later, we are recording, and the replay will be available tomorrow on our website at tlcdelivers.com/webinars. So be sure to check back tomorrow for that. Now with that, please allow me to introduce our panelists today. We are being led by Jenna Thorn from our Library.Solution for Schools product team. And joining her are two of our partners from Frisco Independent School District in Texas. We have Jo Lambert and Sara Riley. Thank you both for joining us, all three of you for joining us today. Jenna, I'll hand it over to you. What else can you tell us about our panelists?
Thanks, Ria. Sorry, looking for the button. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, like Ria said, my name is Jenna Thorn. I'm the circulation product owner at TLC, and I am joined by Jo Lambert, who is the librarian at Reedy High School with Frisco ISD, and Sara Riley, who's the coordinator of Library Curation and Systems at the district level for Frisco. Both are well-versed in genrefication, and I'm so excited to have them with us to talk about their experiences. So thank you both for joining us today. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Library.Solution for Schools and genrefication. And part of this is because we created a new genrefication information document that kind of goes over the options that you have in our ILS and provides kind of some planning with worksheets and checklists and a fillable PDF. And then, of course, we wanted to talk with Jo, and Sara about their genrefication journeys. And we're going to highlight the genrefication process they underwent, specifically Jo and then Sara at the district level, and then some of the ILS implementation decisions they had to make and ongoing maintenance. I'm going to turn it back over to Ria.
Yeah, thanks. So before we get this kicked off, we do have one quick poll for our audience to see where you're at with your genrefication process. So is your school or library thinking about genrefying? And your options are yes, we are considering it, or yes, and we are actively working towards genrefying. Yes, and we've already made the switch. Congratulations. No, but I'm interested in the possibility. You're in the right place. So you can see all the pros and cons. And my favorite, what is genrefication? So maybe you just joined because you've been hearing about the word, but don't know what it is. We have that option for you as well. So there are a few answers coming back. It's a three-way split so far between the first two and the no, but I'm interested in the possibility. So a little bit across the board. We do have a couple of folks who are asking, what is genrefication? So maybe a quick preview for that as well. All right, I'll hand it back over to you, Jenna, and I will see you at the end of the presentation. I'm going to disappear for a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Ria. So yeah, I will go into a little bit of what genrefication is. So, but first, I just wanted to mention that, we all know how unique libraries are. Even within one district, each school can have vastly different populations and schedules and curriculum needs. So here at TLC, we wanted to help you embrace that uniqueness and diversity in your schools and school libraries. So that's why when we were putting together the genrefication options to highlight the different ways to go in our system, we decided to break it down on how each option affects the different parts of the ILS. A Library.Solution for Schools is so customizable, and we want you to be able to take advantage of that when you're considering genrefying your collections. And so that you kind of you understand all of your options and you're able to make decisions that are right for you. And I'll go into genrefication a little bit when I go over a brief overview of the documents, but I just did want to let you know that for our customers, you can find that on our school's community page on LS Community, and it's under tips and tricks, and there's a section for genrefication, and both documents are listed there, and I think Ria is going to add the links in the chat. So let's jump into the documents. So here's the overview, and genrefication really is just a way of helping your students and your staff, your patrons, to be able to find the books that they want to read. So if you think about your fiction collection, that's the most common, I think, that's genrefied. The first option in Library Debt Solution for Schools is creating new holdings codes as owning collections or genres. So if you think about your fiction collection, and you want to break it into different sections or categories or genres. So you might have a science fiction, a humor, romance, fantasy, realistic fiction. The labels kind of have to match up with how your students or your patrons are searching for things and what they're looking for. Because as you know, certain titles can go in multiple genres, and so it gets a little tricky, but you know your population best. So the first option, like I said, is creating those new holdings codes. So you might take your fiction collection and break it into genres, and you move in the system, you move those titles to that new genre name and holdings code. The second option is to create new holdings codes as a circulating collection. So with this, you might maintain that nonfiction overall holdings code, but then move certain topics into smaller categories like sports and adventure for a circulating code. And then the third option is changing the shelf location by adding a prefix. So maybe you don't want to mess around with the holdings codes at all, and you really just want this to be more of a way for them to find it in the pack and on the shelf, and you're just changing kind of that, adding that genre information to the prefix. So those are really the three ways to do it. And I just want to walk through how we broke it up for each option. This is for the first one, but we highlighted in LS2 preferences, because as we're thinking about this, it just touches so many places. I mean, even beyond the ILS, and we'll talk about this with Nancy, Jo, and Sarah. You know, it touches the shelving, the signage, the space in your, so physical and digital. So, but preferences is definitely a place because that's where you're adding your holdings codes and changing things around. So that's a consideration. And then, of course, we touched on cataloging. Kind of gave you some screenshots so you can really understand what they look like in the system when you go to do this on your own. Of course, here's a catalog record where you can see they changed the owning collection to historical fiction, and then you can change the shelf location or label to look how you reflect what you want to see on the shelves. And then, of course, spine labels, big part of, and it doesn't have to be, but it could be. Some people choose not to change spine labels and only add an additional sticker. So lots of options. Inventory is a big one, kind of considering your inventory options as you change those codes around or add prefixes. And then LS2 staff is kind of our circulation module. And so a lot of considerations here. You can move things around in LS2 staff, change codes that way as well. And then lists and actions is kind of like our way to gather some light reporting within LS2 staff. So there's some implications there. And then, of course, the big one, searching the catalog. So LS2 Pack and LS2 Kids, what does that look like with each option? So tried to cover that really well with some good screenshots for you. And the virtual shelf. How do you want that to look for your patrons? And finally, the biggest one, I think, well, I don't know, they're all big, but LS2 reporting. So genrefication is can be such a big project, and hopefully will change your circulation stats and all kinds of things that you really want to be able to advocate for your school and your district and your students. So hopefully, you're thinking about the reporting aspect of that later. That's part of the ongoing maintenance that we'll talk about, because that's really important to consider when you're venturing into this kind of project. And lastly, before we talk with Nancy, Jo, and Sara, I just want to go over the checklist. We created this to sort of for your own planning and something for you to keep in mind, as you're going through the process, and things to consider and remember. But if at any point you need help with the process, it's really easy to upload this to a support ticket, and our wonderful support team would be happy to help you with some of these tasks. They've helped a lot of our customers, and they're really good at it. So we created this document with that in mind. So for planning purposes, just kind of the genre suggestions, it's really hard to think about what's best for your school. So I always find if I have a little list, I can go from there and come up with what I need, what's best for my students. And then nonfiction as well at all the different levels. And then we kind of talk a little bit more about some TLC specific tasks. But again, really good to go over like on the shelves, what do you want this to look like? How do you want to identify the genres with the labels and the signage throughout the library and within the catalog or the pack? And then too, a big one that we often hear is, how many genre codes or prefixes are you using? So making sure it's manageable, so that's important as well. And then at the very end is the fillable part. So do you want to run a genre report to get some of that data to figure out where to put the books? Are you going to touch every book and decide where it goes? Everyone's a little different. So giving you some options here. And of course, all the different profiles you'll need to link with the new holdings codes and things like that. So that is it for those documents. So now let's get talking about Frisco. So first, I want to just say a big, huge thank you to Nancy Jo for sharing so many of her resources, both on the Reedy High School Library website, where she documented both fiction genrefication and nonfiction genrefication, but also with us. She shared so many of the photos, documents, labels, and infographics that you're going to see throughout this section of the presentation. I want to give her credit for that and thank her. So you'll notice that, or I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of small, but the first post was 2016, and then nonfiction was 2022. So Nancy Jo, I was just wondering, why'd you start with fiction over nonfiction?
Thanks so much, Jenna, for having me and for highlighting this. I know that a lot of school librarians either want to engage in a genrefication process or start engaging and then they realize, oh, this is a huge job. So I appreciate y'all providing all these resources and providing this webinar. I know that this will be really helpful to school librarians everywhere. So when I opened Reedy High School in 2015, and we opened a campus. We're 9 through 12 now, but the first year we were 9 and 10, and then the next year we were 9, 10, 11 grades, and then the third year we were a full campus. So in 2015, I opened with a pretty small collection, and then continued to build it. And so when we first opened the library, the kids would come in and be like, I want a romance book, or, I want a science fiction book. And I was like, well, they're all over. And so, I quickly realized, especially at a high school, but I also I was a pre-K librarian and an elementary librarian as well. And I had already begun kind of genrefying the 2 different elementary libraries I had been in and the ECS library. I kind of was grouping books differently than, than officially Dewey, especially for our youngest readers. I think that those groupings are really important, but I decided to do fiction first here at the high school level because I just really wanted the kids to be able to find books by genre, because that's typically how they ask for books. So that was the biggest reason, was just because I wanted to, as S.R. Ranganathan, the father of library and information science, says, save the time of the user. So
Nice. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay, let's dive into some of the planning pieces.
So I had by the second year, I had our opening collection, and then I had, we had certain monies available during that first year to, increase the collection pretty substantially. And so by the end of that first year, I had a pretty decent sized collection. And I was like, now is the time because we're only going to be adding books. So we just need to go ahead and get this done. So we're not, because I was like, should I wait? So I got all the, I actually used, at the time, Mackin was just starting their genrefication service, and I know Follett now has one, and I think there's another company that also has one. So there's lots of that's definitely a service that you can get. But basically I had to upload my records to Mackin, and then they sent me back a report of like, here's how, the system sort of genrefied your fiction collection. So this many books are in fantasy, this many books are in sci-fi. And then I kind of went through the report title by title, and and made sure that like my series stayed together, because for some reason a lot of times when you genrefy, they're like, here's this series of 5 books and 2 are in dystopian and 3 are in sci-fi. And so you kind of have to just double check some of those things. And then at the time I had an adult paraprofessional library aide with me in the library, and so she would take the pages as I would get them done, and she would go sticker the physical spines of the books, because obviously we have, they're all in Dewey order, and so all the romance are not together and all the sci-fi are not together, and so she was stickering them in accordance with the genre that we were indicating for them. And then once I had a good idea of about how many books were in, you see, there's even pictures there. Wow, these pictures are old.
There's some
There's,
map.
I know there's like pictures, like a map of like the shelves, and like I think I had the math teacher help me because I was like, if I have this, it's like a real life word problem. If I have this many books in this collection and I have this many shelves, how many books per shelf? How many shelves do I need for this collection? Like, so you've gotta think about where the books are going to live after you've got them in these collections. So there's some more pictures. Wow, this is
Yeah.
bringing back the memories. So we went through and stickered all the books, and then we initially thought, let's just try and like move all of start moving them slowly, and we realized very quickly that was not going to work because the space issue was just, it wasn't going to fly. So what we did was I have a bunch of carts. You can see them in the picture there. So we took all the books off of one shelf, and we started organizing the books on the carts by genre, and then going around and finding the genres for those first few shelves and putting the books on them, so that then we would have carts and space to work with. And so we kind of did it very systematically over a couple of days, and physically moved every single fiction book from its original Dewey spot to its new genrefied location.
And here, so later you did nonfiction, and did you do anything different?
Oh yeah, so nonfiction was a totally different process. And I didn't use a service because ultimately I realized, one, so it was 2022, so the library had been open 7 years. Our collection had grown substantially. We were running out of shelf space to even add new books, which is a totally different issue. So what we did was I was like, okay, first I need to weed. So I went through and weeded nonfiction pretty heavily, because I hadn't weeded nonfiction because of the COVID and all the things. And so even though I'd been open 7 years and I was supposed to start weeding nonfiction after 5 years being open, with COVID and all the things, it just didn't happen. So I had a huge weeding project to engage in. So I did that first. And then with the books that were left, I just started putting them on carts. And then I would have my library aides bring them up to the circ desk, and I would sit there and I would decide kind of on the spot. I would look at the book, I would look at the record for the book, and I would kind of decide. And this was I also kind of knew space wise how many like bays and and shelves and things I was going to have for certain collections. So I knew approximately how many books I needed to have in each collection. So that kind of guided a little bit too of where I put things, as far as like people are like, why is true crime and arts and entertainment? And I'm like, well, it just, so some of it was a spacing issue, but also it was like an issue of when the kids are looking for some of these genres of books, where do they go to? And so I was having my library aides engage with me on that as well. Like, if you were looking for a book about this, which of these sections do you think you would go to? And so I had them help me, because ultimately this is all about the kids being able to find books and browse for books in a way that's meaningful to them, which the Dewey classification system is just not. And people are like, well, they have to know it for future skills. And I'm like, do they? I mean, what library do you walk into where there's not signage and a catalog and people to help you? Like, I don't think Dewey is a life skill. Sorry, not sorry. And so I do think that them being able to navigate, being like, oh, I want a book with a poem in it, so I should probably go to literature and poetry. I think that is a life skill that they should definitely have. And our students have come up through our schools, which are very heavily Dewey. Or historically were heavily Dewey. And so I'm like, if I got a kid who's a senior and they still don't understand how Dewey works, they're not going to understand it ever. It's not something that their brain thinks they need. Um, so I wanted to organize it in a way that really made sense to kids. And so those were where our categories came from. And so then I would decide on the spot, and then we just kind of started trying to find shelves where we could house the different collections until we got them all done. And then we went through and moved all of the individual collections to their new physical spots, and then went from there with signage and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So, yeah, I think polling your population, finding out, what makes sense to them is a very big part of this whole process, and it's a great learning experience. I think I've done it a couple of times myself. But space. So you were talking about moving shelves and things like that, but this is like, it's always an opportunity to then reevaluate the flow of your library and the space planning part. So.
Yeah, and I really wanted to rethink the library because our circulation stats, the number of books that kids were checking out, and the reason they were checking out books was just going down and down and down. And after COVID, where kids were accessing a lot of our digital collection, which was fantastic, that our digital collection was getting used. But in discussions with both my principal and students and other staff and administrators, it was like, I want the library to be a place that is not just about coming to get a book, but also is a place where it's easy to come and get a book. And so we decided, so previously the architect had decided that, all these shelves would be designed this way. And I'd stuck pretty closely to the architect, that designed the building, their original like vision of the library, which I'm not sure why I stuck to their vision for so long, but whatever. We're past it now. And so I started floating. I used this SketchUp for Schools because it was part of our Google Apps for Education suite that we have access to. And I measured all of our shelves and the space and everything. And so I actually was able to come up with 5 different plans that were accurate to both the shelves, the size of the shelves, etc. And I floated these 5 different plans with, administrators, staff, students, and I was like, which one do you like the best? And so ultimately you see where we started and then how it ended up. And the students absolutely love, like, my principal purchased all this extra flexible seating. And so it's much more of like a bookstore atmosphere now. When you come in, you can the shelves are everywhere in the library and not just in one spot. We have them in every area of the library where the students are. We have flexible seating in all those areas so the kids can sit amongst the books. And so when they come in for advisory and other times, they're actually sitting with the books. And we found that it actually does happen where the kids are like, oh, that looks like an interesting book, and takes it off the shelf and checks it out, or at least looks at it, which is progress from where we were. So I think that it's been just a way to make the library more inviting, more user friendly, and then also, just putting the kids amongst the books on a more regular basis has made a huge impact on nurturing our readers here on our campus. So.
Awesome. And Sarah, at the district level, you've probably seen lots of librarians to undergo this process. What have you kind of learned as you're seeing different ways of genrefying and different levels at the district
Well,
level?
everybody, we have tried to give everyone as much autonomy as possible in how they genrefy. Some campuses in the district are genrefied and some are not. They kind of have decided what works best for their students and their campus community. So when they're genrefying, some only do fiction, some do fiction and nonfiction. Some do like one or two genres, but not the whole gamut of fiction. So they keep some just in a fiction genre and they break out like realistic fiction or mysteries or something like that, because those are what their kids gravitate towards. So they don't do everything exactly the same. But we try to give them the choices to do what is going to work best for their kiddos and their communities.
Yeah, that's awesome that you just support them and where they're at with it. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now I just kind of wanted to go into a little bit more of the implementation decisions within the ILS. So here's your Canva labels. Nancy Jo, I love this. Pick this screenshot because it's like and I use Canva too to help with the designing, and that's the fun part, I think. um, so we've got your different collections, and then how they look in the system, how they look on the labels, and then the shelves. That didn't seem to change too much from when or maybe the dynamic shelving got better as you went along.
Definitely, and I credit Kelsey Bogan over on Twitter, who's a friend of mine too, for the dynamic shelving philosophy and practice, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I didn't change. When we genrefied fiction, obviously we had the genres on the fiction labels. And so any shelf in the library that has like a black shelf label and then just the white spine label, the kids know that's some kind of fiction, right? And then anything with a color is our nonfiction or special collections. And so it's also very, very clear when you walk in the library, like you're like, oh, there's books with yellow spines, there's books with pink spines, like what's going on? So it's really, really clear too, because obviously I have student library aides who are helping me reshelve books and do inventory and all that kind of stuff. And so to have a very clear indication on the spine label of, where that book goes is really helpful. And so that's why, and so since I'd already done the genrefied fiction and had those on the spine label, I was like, well, I don't actually want to change spine labels for nonfiction. I just want to add a color over the top. And I know that that's just been really easy for me and my students.
Yeah, I'm going to show the special collections. And you have everybody in its own genre, right? So your picture book collection, and then you added picture books to the shelf label. So you kind of did a combination.
Correct. So we have a lot of special populations and centralized classrooms for students who are on various cognitive and developmental levels. And so I quickly realized that I needed to have a collection of books that was appealing to them, as well as our older, as well as our other students. And then our teachers too, a lot of times have requested picture books for various lessons and learning experiences. And so it's been important for me to develop that collection and have a space for it too. So when our kiddos from some of those classrooms come in and want to access those books, they have an area that, that they is very clearly designated for them, and that they can enjoy and partake in the whole library experience. So I have all of the fiction picture books. Bye y'all. Take care of yourselves, make good choices, drink water. So I have all of the everybody books, or like the fiction books, on one side, and then I have the nonfiction and biographies on the other, but they all have the shelf designation, the shelf location picture books, and then they have their regular spine label as far as the shelf location. So
Right, and they know to go to green, right?
yep, go find the green books.
Awesome. And Sarah, so this was an interesting, highlight of the differences that can, like when you give autonomy, what that can look like. Same title, and then each school has a different kind of designation for it. And so You know, do you offer any kind of, you know, tailored support for that in terms of like options and things that they have?
Yes, we have a list of genres that they are allowed to use and pull from. Now, how they um, categorize certain books is totally up to them. Like, as you can see in that picture, Anne of Green Gables, that top one that just says fiction, that library is probably not genrefied. So it's just in their fiction collection. But then there's historical fiction and classics and even realistic fiction and language and literature. So they kind of have the autonomy to choose which genre they think their kids are going to use the most. Most of the elementaries don't have a classics section, so they probably have this one genrefied in either historical fiction or possibly realistic fiction, depending on where they think their kiddos will find the book. And we have something similar for nonfiction as well. Once librarians started wanting to genrefy their nonfiction, there was like a group of secondary librarians that got together and kind of decided what genres are we going to have available for nonfiction across the district. That way everybody could choose what worked for their campus, but also there was like a set list of options. And some people within genrefying change the holdings codes, or some just do the spine labels and keep the same holdings code nonfiction and only change that shelf location, which is what Nancy Jo did with her nonfiction collection. She only changed the shelf location and left them all in the holdings code with nonfiction. So it kind of depends on the librarian and what she knows is going to work best for her kiddos.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that kind of speaks to the last section I want to talk about with this, that ongoing maintenance, right? So that's part of the inventory. But I kind of first wanted to talk, Nancy Jo, about the reports. So with the reporting that you got after you did both of these genreifications in those collections, what happened?
Well, and I want to say too that I use the reports during the genreification of my nonfiction, and I use the reports still when I want to do like an item count. Like if I want to know the number of items in my fantasy collection, so I can tell my library, it's like we need to have approximately this many books on every shelf, so we need to shift some of these books. So I use reports all the time. Obviously this one was a huge one. So when I told my principal, you know, I want to undertake this huge, like, I want to reorganize the space and I want to reorganize another collection. And he was like, okay, if that's what we want to do. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be great. And so at the end, I was able to also provide this to him to be like, due to, you know, this massive project that we undertook and the furniture that you provided and, you know, all of these things that you've done, we've actually increased. And so these numbers were huge and really telling as to the importance of what, you know, obviously it's a combination of a lot of things, right? The reorganization of the physical space, the reorganization of the books, the dynamic shelving, the you know, the having the books amongst the kids now, all these things. So it increased our circulation. And I actually had the circulation stats for going back for a full 5 years, because I was like, well, the COVID years, how accurate, you know, how accurate is that circulation going to be, kind of thing. And so I actually went back for all the way back to 2018. And so I was able to produce, you know, these numbers that are incredibly telling about how impactful, you know, these changes can be when it comes to getting the books in the reader's hands. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and our reporting capabilities are pretty great. So I'm
oh,
glad that they
I'm constantly pulling reports for all kinds of things.
awesome.
That item count one though, by like the holdings code, that is a huge one. Just for general like spacing and shelving things, I probably use that one at least once or twice a month, at like on the regular.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting to think about then, that, you know, that's something to consider as you're deciding, you know, do you want to change the holdings codes? And, you know, if so, to help you with that reporting capability.
Mhm.
And then how about inventory? Because I know that you said that nonfiction, you just kept in nonfiction as a whole group, and there was a reason for that, right?
Yeah, so part of the reason why I didn't want to change the holding codes for my nonfiction was because we also incorporated all of our biographies. So whatever reference that I kept went into nonfiction, all the biographies went into nonfiction. So I don't have a biography collection anymore. Within each of the genres that you showed earlier, like arts and entertainment, sports and adventure, technology, like all of those ones have biographies mixed in with them. And so for inventory purposes, obviously I have my student library aides do inventory for me and scan all the books. And so I was like, ooh, for nonfiction, that's going to be rough if I've got all these biographies mixed in here. So let's just put them all in nonfiction. So, and people are like, well, that's such a huge collection then. And I'm like, yes, it's literally thousands of books. But also, like when I have students doing it, 2 or 3 periods a day, it only takes them a couple of days even to scan in our nonfiction. And it's just easier because then they can just go ding, ding, ding all the way through, and they don't have to worry about collections or anything like that. And I found after having them inventory fiction for so many years that people are like, well, I think the smaller collections are easier for inventory. And I'm like, well, I don't know. My kids, there were so many challenges posed with that. So pick one big nonfiction collection for the purposes of inventory is great.
Yeah, and it's nice again that customizable, that you can do it depending on how you're changing it. You can inventory in small little sections or not. So yeah,
And
it's
it
nice to
allows
have.
me to switch books. Like if I want to move this book from this one, all I have to do is take off that color label and just change the shelf location, and it's really easy too.
That's true. And honestly, I felt that was a big part of the ongoing maintenance because inevitably there's always a book that you find they're like, no, that should not be there. That
Yeah,
needs to
I
go somewhere
literally
else.
did one just yesterday. I was like, why is this one over here? When I was like doing some training with my library aides, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna take this off and move it right over here to this collection.
Yeah, yeah. So it's important. And then lastly, and I'm going to let you speak to this, Sarah, just the new books coming in. And I think this is one of the hardest parts at the district level, probably, right? Making sure working with the vendors to make sure that it comes in correctly.
Absolutely. So, since we have so many different librarians who genrefy differently, we provide spec sheets to our vendors. And as they genrefy or add new collections, then we have to make sure that those are always updated. Some choose to use the genrefication services, and then some, like provided by the vendors, and some just prefer to get all their books in fiction or all their books in nonfiction, and then do like a transfer within the holdings codes within that location to the correct genre. And then they have like their student aides put this color overlays on or put a genre sticker or something like that. When I was on a campus, that's what I did just to make sure that those mark records were always correct. I didn't do genre processing from the vendor, but a lot of our librarians do. So we just have to make sure that we provide those correct spec sheets. And another thing we always have to do when we genrefy a new library is make sure that we have allowed checkout to all the students on that campus for each of those new genres in that rules profile.
Linking.
Totally
Yeah.
forgot that one time, and it was a big old mess. So, we just try to support them with whatever they need throughout that process, choosing genres, helping them scan and transfer books, labeling, all that stuff. We just try to offer that support from our side to the librarians.
Yeah, that's awesome. And every school, every district is going to be different, but just kind of knowing your options and to make the best choices for what works for you. Okay, I'm going to shoot it back to Ria. I think we have another poll.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. So we did get a lot of questions that have come in so far, and if you have more questions, please go ahead and add them into the questions panel. We're going to switch into our QA in just a moment. But if you're not able to stick around or you would like to get more information from TLC, our current poll on the screen is whether you would like more information for your library. So we're going to leave that up for just a moment, and I'm going to start going through some of the questions that have already come in. and if you do have questions, please continue to add them. So let me pull up, I have a couple of screens. So the first one is for Nancy Jo. So when you were choosing what images to use or what colors for each of your nonfiction, did you have any sort of reasons behind which section went with which color?
No. What I did was I went to Dimco, which is where I get my color overlay little tinted labels. I don't have any around, or I would hold one up. But I tried to pick colors that weren't too similar to each other. So there's, a limited set of colors you can choose from. So I just picked the ones that I felt like were, and then like I did want like the bright green. I wanted those to be on our picture book collection, for those kiddos. So I can be like, go find the bright green books over there on that shelf. And like I wanted our graphic novels to be like the hot pink, just because again, it's a very clear indication of that book. But no, there really wasn't a color. I didn't like have any sort of insightful color coding there.
Yep, no worries. We did get another one in Nancy Jo for inventory with Dewey. It will alert you if something is out of order as you scan. So since you mentioned having your biographies kind of mixed around with genrefied call numbers, will inventory recognize the correct shelf order and alert you to something out of order?
No, so we click that off when we do inventory because our books are in no way, shape, or form in any sort of order. Obviously for fiction, like the fiction genres they are, but even then, like, I mean, if it's in the wrong collection, it'll still tell me that, but we don't do the order thing. And like all of our nonfiction collections, there's like I have like a shelf, so it might say like, inspiring pet stories or whatever. And so all the books on that shelf are in arts and entertainment, and they have some sort of like you'd be surprised at how many inspiring pet stories there are. So that whole shelf is inspiring pet stories. And then I have like 4 shelves of just inspiring biographies in the arts and entertainment, so it was just kind of like so I don't know that there's no, and on certain shelves, so like the 4 shelves of inspiring biographies and arts and entertainment, those are in like order by the call number on the spine. But no, order is not really a thing anymore. And honestly, the kids, I did that for the kids because they're so worried about getting things out of order or messing it up or whatever. And I was like, they're just ransack away, have fun, find a book, pick them up, put it back. I don't care. It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. Like, I just, we don't have that many books. Like if I know it's in arts and entertainment and it's got a red sticker on it, it's on one of these 4 shelves. It's got to be here. We'll find it, or it's lost, and then we need to mark it lost.
It's really great because that actually answers another question that came in, is for the nonfiction that you said still have the Dewey numbers. Do they get shelved in Dewey order? But it sounds like they kind of just live in that section.
They do. And like I see the question about fall into multiple genres. That was a decision that I just kind of had to make, especially with fiction and nonfiction. There would be a book, I had all these books that were about dogs, and they're all in like the Dewey classification for animals and dogs, but it's like this is a soldier story about, a soldier dog, and then this one is like a dog's journey. And I was like, why are all these books, these don't make any sense together? And the kids, it didn't make any sense to the kids either. And so that's why, I very much went off of what does the book look like, what's on the inside, back cover. I would look at the subject headings, in the MARC record too. But ultimately, if I was a kid and I was looking at this book, where, and I wanted to read this book, where would I be able to find this book most easily? And that's kind of how I decided how to put them in, the different genres for fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, and you'd also mentioned the items holdings report, the count of items by holdings code
Correct.
as well. So this is a question for both you and for Sara at the district level of, are there any other reports that you would recommend specifically for genrefying? And Sara, what reports are you getting requested from your librarians that you're seeing that are thinking about genrefying their collections?
I think the most common one is activity counts. So just how many books are being checked out in different sections, like based on who has already genrefied and, maybe I should genrefy because this library has way more circulations than my library has. If they could find it easier, maybe they'd check it out more.
And
And
I cannot stress enough how important it is. Like, think about I mean, very rarely do my students come in and ask for a very specific nonfiction title, right? Like, that's super rare that happens. And when it does, I can still find that book. It's not exactly in this exact right Dewey Decimal place, but what does happen is they're like, I want a book, I want an adventure book, or I want a book about the Supreme Court, or I want a book about, true crime, those things they come in and ask for. And so now I can point them to, here's a whole shelf books about true crime, have at it, live your best life. And so that is a much more browsable. And so each shelf has a little white, like just label maker label that I made for what's on that shelf. And I kind of tried to group books on different shelves by that type of thing, because it's just, that is how the kids ask for the books. So that is how I felt like they should be arranged on the shelf so that the kids can find them and browse them and pick them up and look at them and put them back without a worry about, oh, did I get the decimal point right? I don't care about that anymore. Dewey's dead. Change the call number. He's not going to care.
well, and I want to give a plug to our LS2 Kids Pack as well, because that was the same philosophy that went into the digital version of that, is how are the kids looking for the books? And so we have those categories set up based on how they think about it. And we did have another school customer reach out to be able to use those images when they were genrefying their collection. So they have the same Kids Pack images like tigers, elephant circus, that kind of thing on their shelves too. So for others who are interested in that and want to link it to the pack, we do have those images available to customers in LS community. So good tip for you all there. Okay, I have two more questions, and then I promise I'll release you. So, Nancy Jo, you had mentioned a little bit about dynamic shelving and Kelsey Bogan's philosophy on that. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more for folks who haven't maybe heard about that philosophy or looking to create more engaging spaces as they genrefy as they go?
So I think it started like a few years ago. A lot of librarians were talking about like, why are we so married to they have to be on the shelf in this order with only the spine showing? Because we have so many books with these fantastic covers, very interesting, engaging, beautiful artwork on these covers. Why are we always why do they have to be just spines out? And so Kelsey, if you just Google Kelsey Bogan dynamic shelving, she has some blog posts where she's written tons prolifically about this topic. And so I had read those, and of course I'm friends with her on Twitter or X or whatever it is now. And so I was like, when I do this reorganization for both our fiction and our nonfiction, and like I said, we move these shelves so that the kids are amongst the books, I want there to be, and this is what I tell my libraries, I want there to be at least one book on every shelf that's face out, if not more. And then we also got the plastic shelves. I think it was in some of the pictures maybe, but from Dimco, and all this is linked in those blog posts. Like every product I use, everything I did is all linked in those blog posts. But I also then, so for, Project Lit, there's two, clear shelves where the kids can put face out books on those clear shelves from that section. And then we have face out books on every shelf. And so the dynamic shelving thing is just where they don't all have to be in a line. So I told my librarians, have one bookend with some books, but then have like little stacks of books on the shelves, have face out books. And so my librarians get pretty creative with with how they design. I call them shelf designers now. I'm like, you're the shelf designer of this section. So please, take care of it, design away, be creative. Because ultimately, if it's designed in a way that they find appealing, then other kids are probably going to find that design as appealing too.
Yeah, definitely. All right, last one, which is how long did this project take beginning to end? And is there anything that you would do differently? I guess that's kind of two questions, but going along with it.
So for fiction, I want to say the fiction, it took me about a semester um, to go through the process of uploading the records, starting to figure out the books. And then we spent about a week. It was a matter of 2 or 3 days, I think, to actually physically move the books. And then we had another week where we had to go, because at the time I had to go back and do all new spine labels for my fiction, so they would be genrefied fiction. When we did nonfiction, we started this in the summer right before school started, because I had some kids volunteer to come up. My shelves are on wheels. You can't really tell, and they're super heavy. They're not like easy to move by any stretch. So I had them come up and move the shelves into this new floor plan situation. And then here's one of my library aides that helped me with the project last year, that I'm doing a webinar on the genrefication. Anyway, so then from about August till October, we were categorizing the books, moving the books. And so for a couple of months for sure, it was chaotic, because the books were everywhere and people would be like, can we find, and I'm like, listen, I don't know where that book is right now. Like, well, I'm not gonna get back to you. I'm like 2 weeks. Everything was always 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks, not 2 weeks. But I think by November for sure, we were everything was in its new spot, and we were putting in the dynamic shelving. I did have to go back and do a bunch of record cleanup, because I had my library aides putting in the shelf location things, and they didn't always put those in correctly. So I had to do some records cleanup. So I ended up cleaning up around 700 records or so, but that was fine. But I would say it took about a semester both times, start to finish.
Yeah, so feasibly in one school year, you could do both fiction
Oh,
and
for
fiction,
sure.
get it all done.
But
And
I'm
anything,
also like, I'm a workhorse. Like, my library director, she was like, I don't know how you did this so fast, because I know there've been other secondary librarians who are like working on genrefying their nonfiction, and they're 2 years into the project and it's like a work in progress. Bye, kiddo. Take care of yourself, make good choices, drink water. So I know that it can take longer, so I don't want people to be like, oh, she did it in a semester, I should be able to do it in a semester, and then it take longer and you be like, I'm a failure. You're not. Everybody works differently, so just give yourself grace.
yes, and I think it also depends on how big the collection is, how much furniture has to move. There's so many elements that go into that.
Correct. Yeah, lots and lots.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you both so much for your time, especially while also managing the library and have library aides and students coming and going while you're there. I did have a couple of items I wanted to mention, and then I'll do some closing thoughts. So Webinar Wednesday is being recorded. So this is available tomorrow at tlcdelivers.com/webinars. Everything that Jenna mentioned at the top of the call is available at LS Community under the TLC Schools section, and tips and tricks to be able to grab that genrefication document, and the fillable one if you want to send that to TLC support as well. We are also going to be talking about genrefication again at our annual user conference this fall. So for customers who haven't registered for that and are interested in learning more and hearing from different perspectives, please register. Prices will go up at the end of the month, so be sure to get it in now. I think that was all the reminders I had to share, and I haven't seen any other questions come in so far. So I was going to say, we'll start with Sarah. Do you have any closing thoughts on this whole genrefication process?
I think the biggest thing is just to kind of let your students guide you and ask for help as you need it. Someone is always there to support you. Even if you don't have district personnel, there are other librarians you can reach out to. And, it's something that all students enjoy, because that's how they are going to look for books. And it will definitely be worth it in the end. It may not be worth it in the middle, but it'll be definitely worth it at the end.
Oh, thank you. Nancy, Jo, final thoughts?
If anybody, I get people that reach out to me all the time, because I'm also an adjunct professor at UNT, and I teach pre-service school librarians in the master's and PhD program there. So a lot of times, like, I get lots of emails. I've written lots of professional journals and things, but if you want me to give you any specific, help or assistance, you can always email me at my Frisco email, lambertin@friscoisd.org, and I'm happy to provide any assistance I can. And I think, like what Sara said, if you're going to engage in this process, involve your students and do it in a way that is going to make sense to your students and the population of kiddos that you work with, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to nurture our readers and engage kids in reading and the process of being a reader. And the process of being a reader is not just about reading the book in your hand. It's about getting excited about a book, acquiring the book, finding the book, bringing the book back and telling somebody about the book. And so, any way that you can, so one of the things I did is if like a kid brings back something and they're like, oh, I love this book. And I'm like, do you want to put it on display? Go put it over here on, and so having ways for kids to celebrate that entire process of being a reader and nurturing that love and enjoyment of reading is all part of why this genrefication process is so important to our kiddos.
That was excellent. Well said. Jenna, any final thoughts on the TLC product side?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you both so much for helping me to put all of the pieces together, because I second everything that both of you said and the reasoning behind it. And I love that our products support that, with our customization and just being able to, and our support team and everybody, helping you on that journey. So it is an important one, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything you both said. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. And like I said, this will be available tomorrow with all the resources that we mentioned as well. So we'll be sure to see you in the next one, and happy back to school for everybody. We hope it's going well. Bye.
Bye.